Welcome to Strides to Solutions with Esther Adams, where we explore the intersection of clinical psychology, neuroscience, and real world application to help you navigate life's complexities with greater skill and understanding. I'm Esther, and today we're talking about something that might feel almost quaint in our age of tweets and instant messages: the profound act of writing by hand for yourself about your deepest thoughts and feelings. If you've ever kept a diary as a teenager, written an angry letter you never sent, or found yourself scribbling thoughts in the margins of a notebook during a difficult time, you've already intuited something that research is now proving. There's something uniquely powerful about the relationship between pen, paper, and psyche. We're going to explore why soldiers in Iraq turn to blogging despite bombs falling around them, why cancer patients who write about their experience show different immune markers than those who don't, and why some of the most important words you'll ever write might be the ones no one else will ever read. There's a story that begins in British East Africa at the turn of the 20th century, at the foot of the Ngong Hills just outside Nairobi. A Danish woman named Karen Blixen found herself in a life that seemed carved from equal parts adventure and catastrophe. She contracted syphilis from an unfaithful husband, lost her farm to fire, lost her land to bankruptcy, and perhaps most devastating of all, lost the one man she truly loved when his small plane crashed into the African earth. Throughout all of this, Karen did something that might seem almost insignificant against such monumental losses. She wrote. She didn't write for publication initially. She wrote for survival. She wrote to make sense of the senseless, to find patterns in chaos, to transform raw experience into something that could be held, examined, understood. Years later, after what she called an ungraceful return to Denmark, these writings would become Out of Africa, published under her pen name Isak Dinesen. But long before they became literature, they were medicine. As she would later observe, all sorrows can be borne if you put them in a story. This insight, that transforming experience into narrative can make the unbearable bearable, isn't just poetic wisdom. It's become the subject of rigorous scientific investigation, and what we've discovered about the relationship between writing and well-being challenges some of our most basic assumptions about how healing happens, because it turns out that the simple act of putting pen to paper, of translating internal experience into external words, creates changes not just in our psychological state, but in our very biology. The history of human writing as a form of processing experience goes back millennia. Long before there were therapists' offices, there were personal chronicles. The word journal comes from the French journée, meaning from sunrise to sunset, and originally journals were kept as navigational tools, ways to track where one had been so one could find the way back or forward. Ship captains kept them, explorers relied on them, and gradually ordinary people began to discover that tracking the geography of their internal landscape was just as important as mapping the external world. But something shifted in our understanding when Dr. Ira Progoff, trained in Jungian psychology, began to systematically study journal writing in the 1960s. Progoff noticed something peculiar. When people wrote in structured ways about their experiences, they seemed to access levels of awareness and integration that talk therapy alone didn't always reach. He called this the transpsychological effect, a term that captures something essential about what happens when we write. We transcend the normal boundaries of our psychological processing. Progoff developed an elaborate system involving a 3-ring binder with 21 different sections: daily log, stepping stones, time stretching, dialogue dimensions. It was almost obsessively organized, and for some people, it was transformative. He took 300 people from New York City's welfare and unemployment rolls, put them through his intensive journal workshop, and within 12 months, over 90% had improved their employment and housing situations. The journal writing, it seemed, had awakened something, a sense of agency, perhaps, or a clarity about patterns that had been invisible before. But for all its success, Progoff's method felt restrictive to many. It was like being given a paint by numbers kit when what you really needed was a blank canvas and permission to make a mess. The evolution toward what we now call humanistic journal therapy recognized this need for both structure and freedom, for guidance without prescription. Then came James Pennebaker, and everything changed. Pennebaker was a psychology professor at Southern Methodist University who did something that seemed almost cruel. He asked students to write about their most traumatic experiences for just 15 minutes a day, 4 days in a row. The immediate aftermath was often distressing: tears, disturbing dreams, temporary increases in anxiety. Any reasonable observer might have concluded this was harmful, but Pennebaker tracked something else: visits to the campus health center. What he found defied conventional wisdom. The students who wrote about trauma made significantly fewer illness visits than those who wrote about superficial topics. When he repeated the experiment with immunologist Janice Kiecolt-Glaser, taking blood samples before and after the writing sessions, they found something even more remarkable. Those who excavated their deepest wounds showed enhanced immune function, specifically in T lymphocyte activity. Think about what this means. The act of writing, not talking to a therapist, not taking medication, not even writing about positive things, but specifically writing about painful experiences, was changing cellular behavior. Words on a page were altering immune response. The implications were staggering. Since Pennebaker's initial studies, research has exploded in this area. Expressive writing has been shown to lower blood pressure in hypertensive patients. It reduces cholesterol levels when people write affectionately. It helps fibromyalgia patients manage their symptoms. It accelerates healing in people grieving romantic breakups. And perhaps most poignantly, it's become a lifeline for military families. Wives of soldiers deployed in Iraq have used writing as a way to process the uncertainty, fear, and isolation of having a spouse in a war zone. But why? What is it about writing that creates these effects? To understand this, we need to think about what happens to experiences that we don't process. When something painful or traumatic happens, and we don't have a way to integrate it into our understanding of ourselves and the world, it doesn't just disappear. It continues to exert influence, requiring psychological energy to keep suppressed. It's like having a program running in the background of your computer. You might not see it, but it's using processing power, slowing everything else down. Writing about these experiences does several things simultaneously. First, it forces us to organize chaos into narrative. The human mind desperately wants things to make sense, to have beginning, middle, and end, cause and effect. When we write, we unconsciously impose structure on experience. This isn't falsification, it's integration. We're taking the raw data of experience and processing it into a form our minds can work with. Second, writing externalizes the internal. There's something profoundly different about seeing your thoughts on paper versus having them swirl around in your head. In your mind, thoughts can feel overwhelming, infinite, inescapable. On paper, they have boundaries, they have size. You can literally close the notebook and walk away. This externalization creates what psychologists call distance, and distance allows for perspective. Third, and this is crucial, writing engages different parts of the brain than thinking or talking. When you write by hand, especially, you're using motor functions, visual processing, and language centers simultaneously. You're creating multiple neural pathways to the same experience. It's like the difference between taking one road to a destination versus having multiple routes. If one gets blocked, others remain open. There's also something about the pace of writing, particularly handwriting, that seems important. You can't write as fast as you think, and this forced slowing creates space for processing that rapid speech doesn't allow. It's like the difference between gulping water and sipping it, the same substance, but entirely different experiences of consumption and digestion. But not all writing is therapeutic, and this is where things get interesting and complicated. In our age of social media, many people think they're engaging in therapeutic writing when they post personal content online. But there's a fundamental difference between writing for yourself and writing for an audience, even an imagined one. When you write knowing others will read it, you edit, not just for grammar, but for impression management. You craft a persona, conscious of how you'll be perceived. This performance aspect fundamentally changes the psychological process. A personal journal is a sacred space where you can be absolutely truthful, where you can contradict yourself, where you can be petty, vengeful, confused, uncertain. You can write things that would destroy relationships if spoken aloud, and in writing them, often discover they're not quite true, or not the whole truth, or true but not the most important truth. This freedom to be completely honest with yourself is essential for the therapeutic effect. The privacy of journal writing allows for what we might call emotional rehearsal. You can write out conversations you need to have, testing different approaches, different words. You can express rage safely without consequence. You can admit fears you wouldn't dare speak. You can acknowledge desires that feel shameful. In this private space, you can meet all parts of yourself without having to immediately decide which ones to keep. This is particularly important when dealing with trauma or loss. When something devastating happens, we often have contradictory feelings that seem impossible to reconcile. Relief that a suffering parent has died alongside crushing grief. Rage at someone we also desperately miss. Love for someone who hurt us. In public discourse, we're often pressured to simplify these feelings, to pick one and suppress the others. But in a journal, all feelings can coexist. They can dialogue with each other. They can evolve. The concept of unsent letters illustrates this beautifully. One of the most powerful journal techniques involves writing letters you'll never send to people who've died, to those who've hurt you, to parts of yourself, even to abstract concepts like my addiction or my cancer. These letters allow for a form of communication that transcends the possible. You can say goodbye to someone already gone. You can forgive someone who'll never ask for it. You can express gratitude that was never spoken. I think of a client who lost her father suddenly. They'd had a complicated relationship, full of unspoken tensions and unresolved conflicts. She tortured herself with things unsaid, conversations that would never happen. When she began writing letters to him in her journal, something shifted. She could argue with him, forgive him, thank him, rage at him, sometimes all in the same letter. These letters didn't resurrect him, but they resurrected her relationship with him, transformed it from something frozen in time to something that could still evolve. The dream work aspect of journaling opens another dimension entirely. Jung believed dreams were the unconscious mind's attempt to communicate with consciousness. But the language of dreams is symbolic, not literal. When you write down dreams immediately upon waking, you capture them before the rational mind fully engages and starts editing, interpreting, making them sensible. The raw dream, written quickly, preserves something essential that's usually lost in translation. But then comes the fascinating part, returning to written dreams later, sometimes days or weeks later, and discovering patterns, symbols, themes you couldn't see in the moment. The dream about missing a flight might connect to the dream about a locked door, which connects to the dream about speaking but having no voice. Suddenly, a deeper pattern emerges about feeling trapped or unheard. The unconscious has been trying to tell you something, but it needed the accumulation of messages for the meaning to become clear. This accumulation effect is one of the most powerful aspects of sustained journal writing. A single entry might provide momentary relief, like a pressure valve releasing steam, but journals kept over time become something else entirely. They become a map of your psychological terrain. Patterns invisible in daily life become unmistakable on the page. You might discover you always get sick after visiting family. You might notice your anxiety peaks on Sunday nights. You might recognize that certain phrases appear again and again, revealing core beliefs you didn't know you held. One of my colleagues kept a journal for a year and was shocked to discover, upon rereading, that she mentioned feeling not good enough in some form in nearly every entry. She was successful, accomplished, respected, but this core belief was running like a program in the background, coloring everything. Seeing it repeated on page after page made it impossible to ignore, and also, strangely, made it seem more manageable, like identifying a glitch in code that could potentially be fixed. The poetry therapy aspect of journaling deserves special attention. Poetry might seem like an odd therapeutic tool, but it has unique properties that prose doesn't. When you write in poetic form, you're forced to distill experience to its essence. You have to choose words more carefully, consider rhythm and sound, create images rather than explanations. This concentration of expression can bypass psychological defenses that prose might trigger. There's also something about rhyme that seems to soothe the human psyche. Creating rhyme schemes imposes order on chaos, creates predictability in unpredictability. It's like building a container strong enough to hold explosive emotions. The structure of the poem, whether sonnet or haiku or free verse, provides boundaries that make it safe to explore boundless feelings. But perhaps most importantly, poetry requires metaphor, and metaphor allows us to approach the unapproachable. You might not be able to write directly about abuse, but you can write about being a house with broken windows. You might not be able to describe depression, but you can write about being underwater, watching the world shimmer and distort above you. These metaphors aren't avoidance, they're approach strategies for experiences too large or too painful for literal language. The Buzan writing style offers yet another approach, one that recognizes that our minds don't actually think in linear paragraphs. Tony Buzan's method involves creating what might look like controlled chaos on the page, a line dividing thoughts from feelings, circles and branches radiating out like neural networks. It's writing that looks more like thinking actually feels, multidirectional, interconnected, sometimes contradictory. This visual approach to journaling can be particularly helpful for people who feel confined by traditional linear writing. It allows for a more accurate representation of how stress actually operates in our minds, not as a single narrative thread, but as a web of interconnected concerns, emotions, physical sensations, and thoughts. When you map it visually, you can sometimes see connections that linear writing would miss. The proprioceptive method developed by Linda Metcalf adds another dimension, the constant questioning of, what do I mean by that? This recursive questioning drives deeper and deeper into the layers of meaning beneath our initial thoughts. You write, I'm angry, then ask, what do I mean by angry? And discover it's actually hurt. Then, what do I mean by hurt? And discover it's disappointment. Then, what do I mean by disappointment? And discover it's a failed expectation you didn't know you held. This archaeological approach to journaling recognizes that our first thoughts are often defensive formations, protective covers for more vulnerable truths underneath. The journal becomes a space for gentle excavation, for moving through the layers of defense to reach the tender core of experience. But there are pitfalls in journal writing that we need to acknowledge. One is what we might call rumination disguised as reflection. Some people write the same complaints, the same grievances, the same circular thoughts day after day, year after year. They're not processing, they're rehearsing, they're not gaining perspective, they're deepening grooves. This kind of journaling can actually maintain depression and anxiety rather than alleviate them. The key difference between therapeutic journaling and rumination seems to be movement. Therapeutic journaling involves evolution of thought, even if it's slow. You might write about the same problem multiple times, but each time you're seeing it from a slightly different angle, adding new information, making new connections. Rumination is static. It's the same thoughts in the same patterns, like a record stuck in a groove. Another pitfall is using journaling as a substitute for necessary action. The journal can become a place where you endlessly analyze why you can't leave the bad relationship, change the soul-crushing job, confront the family member who's hurting you. The writing provides just enough relief to make the situation tolerable, preventing you from taking the actions that would actually resolve it. The journal becomes an enabler of stasis rather than a catalyst for change. There's also the danger of becoming so introspective that you lose touch with the external world. Some people become so focused on their internal landscape that they forget they also live in a shared reality with other people, responsibilities, and relationships that need attention. The journal becomes a retreat from life rather than a tool for engaging with it more skillfully. And then there's the perfectionism that can creep into journaling. People buy beautiful leather bound journals and then feel paralyzed by the blank pages as if their thoughts aren't worthy of such a nice notebook. Or they worry about their handwriting, their grammar, their ability to articulate. They forget that the journal is a tool, not a performance. It's meant to be messy, contradictory, sometimes incoherent. The mess is the point. It's where the work happens. The question of when to write is more complex than it might seem. Many people assume they should write when they're upset, using the journal as an emotional emergency room. And certainly, acute emotional distress is one time when journaling can be helpful. But writing only during crisis means you're only capturing one dimension of your experience. You're creating a record of pathology rather than a full picture of your life. Regular writing, whether daily or several times a week, creates a different kind of resource. It allows you to track the ordinary as well as the extraordinary, to notice the small shifts that precede larger changes. It helps you identify what actually nourishes you versus what you think should nourish you. It reveals patterns of resilience as well as patterns of vulnerability. The time of day matters too. Writing first thing in the morning catches the mind before it's fully defended, when dreams and unconscious material are still close to the surface. Julia Cameron's famous morning pages, 3 pages of stream of consciousness writing done immediately upon waking, are based on this principle. The writing is often nonsensical, whiny, repetitive, but it clears the mental channels for the day ahead. Evening writing serves a different function. It's more reflective, more integrative. It's a chance to process the day's events, to notice what triggered you and why, to acknowledge what you handled well and what you wish you'd done differently. It's like a debrief with yourself, creating closure that can improve sleep and prevent the 3 a.m. anxiety wake ups where the day's unprocessed material demands attention. But the most important timing is consistency. The therapeutic benefits of journaling seem to come not from any single session, but from the accumulated practice. It's like exercise. One workout won't transform your fitness, but regular practice creates lasting change. The journal becomes a companion, a witness, a repository of your evolution. The physical act of handwriting versus typing is worth considering. Research suggests that handwriting activates different neural pathways than typing. The slower pace, the physical formation of letters, the inability to delete all create a different relationship with the words. Handwriting seems to access deeper, less edited material. It's more like drawing than writing, and it engages parts of the brain involved in learning and memory in ways typing doesn't. That said, some people find typing liberating. They can capture thoughts at the speed of thinking, get more material down, make connections quickly, the ability to move text around, to see patterns through word searches, to maintain privacy through password protection. These can be valuable. The key is finding what works for you, what makes you most likely to maintain the practice. The question of rereading old journals is complex. Some therapeutic benefit comes from never rereading, from the pure cathartic release of getting thoughts out and leaving them behind. But most research suggests that periodic rereading, especially with some time distance, provides unique benefits. You become your own therapist, observing your patterns with compassion and curiosity rather than being trapped inside them. When you reread entries from months or years ago, you often discover that problems that felt insurmountable were, in fact, surmounted. Relationships that felt essential ended, and you survived. Fears that consumed you never materialized, or if they did, weren't as catastrophic as anticipated. This perspective can be profoundly reassuring when facing current challenges. It's evidence of your resilience, written in your own hand. But rereading requires the right mindset. If you approach old entries with harsh self judgment, I can't believe I was so stupid. Why did I put up with that? You're re traumatizing rather than healing. The attitude needs to be one of compassionate curiosity. What was I learning then? What was I unable to see? How have I grown since this was written? The integration of journal writing with other therapeutic approaches amplifies its effectiveness. Combining journaling with meditation, for instance, can deepen both practices. You might meditate to calm the mind, then journal to explore what arose during meditation, or journal to identify what's disturbing your peace, then meditate to create space around those disturbances. Physical exercise and journaling create another powerful combination. The endorphins and clarity that come from physical movement can unlock psychological insights. Many people find that their best journal entries come after a run, a yoga session, or a long walk. The body's movement seems to create movement in stuck psychological material. The cultural dimensions of journaling are worth noting. In individualistic Western cultures, the private journal makes intuitive sense. It's personal work for personal growth. But in more collectivist cultures, the idea of processing experience privately rather than communally can feel isolating or even selfish. Adapting journaling to different cultural contexts might mean writing letters to ancestors, creating family journals that multiple generations contribute to, or using journaling as preparation for community dialogue rather than as replacement for it. Gender socialization also influences journaling practice. Despite stereotypes about diary keeping teenage girls, research shows that men and women journal at similar rates, though often differently. Men might frame their journaling as planning or problem solving rather than emotional processing. They might write lists, diagrams, action plans. Women might more readily acknowledge the emotional dimension but might also self censor more, even in private writing, due to internalized judgments about appropriate feelings. The therapeutic power of journaling extends beyond individual healing. During collective traumas, pandemics, wars, natural disasters, journals become historical documents that serve communal processing. The diaries of Anne Frank, the journals of Civil War soldiers, the blogs of COVID-19 ICU nurses, these individual accounts help societies metabolize collective experiences. They transform statistics into stories, abstractions into lived reality. There's something profound about knowing that humans throughout history have turned to writing in times of crisis. From ancient Roman emperors to enslaved Americans who risked their lives to learn to write, from polar explorers to space station astronauts, when faced with extreme circumstances, humans write. We seem to intuitively understand that transforming experience into language is a fundamental tool for maintaining psychological coherence in the face of chaos. The neurobiological effects of expressive writing continue to astound researchers. Recent studies using brain imaging show that writing about emotional experiences activates the prefrontal cortex, the brain's executive center, while calming the amygdala, the fear center. It's literally changing the brain's response to threat. Regular journaling seems to strengthen neural pathways involved in emotional regulation and weakens those involved in rumination and anxiety. The immune system effects that Pennebaker first identified have been replicated and expanded. Writing about trauma doesn't just increase T cell activity, it affects cytokine production, antibody levels, even the expression of genes involved in immune function. The mechanism seems to involve the reduction of chronic stress hormones like cortisol. When we process difficult experiences through writing, we're literally changing our biochemistry. The cardiovascular benefits are equally impressive. People who engage in regular expressive writing show lower blood pressure, improved heart rate variability, and reduced inflammatory markers associated with heart disease. It's as if the act of putting feelings into words prevents them from being expressed through physiological stress responses. The body doesn't have to carry what the page now holds. But perhaps the most profound effect is on what researchers call meaning making. Humans are meaning making creatures. We need our experiences to fit into some coherent narrative about who we are and how the world works. When experiences don't fit, when they're too random, too cruel, too senseless, we suffer not just from what happened, but from the inability to integrate it into our understanding. Journal writing provides a space for this integration work. Through writing, people find patterns in randomness, purpose in suffering, growth in devastation. This isn't denial or sugarcoating, it's the fundamental human capacity to transform experience into meaning. And meaning, research consistently shows, is one of the strongest predictors of resilience and recovery from trauma. The development of what psychologists call narrative coherence through journaling is particularly important for healing. When something traumatic happens, the memory is often fragmented, flashes of image, waves of emotion, disconnected sensations. These fragments intrude into consciousness unpredictably, triggering panic, dissociation, or overwhelming emotion. Through writing and rewriting the experience, these fragments begin to form a coherent narrative with beginning, middle, and end. The memory becomes something that happened rather than something that keeps happening. This is why therapists increasingly incorporate journaling into trauma treatment. It's not a replacement for professional help, but it extends the therapeutic process beyond the therapy hour. Clients can continue processing between sessions, can capture insights that arise at 2 a.m., can practice new ways of thinking about their experiences. The journal becomes a transitional object, a bridge between the therapeutic relationship and independent functioning. For people in recovery from addiction, journaling serves unique functions. It provides an outlet for cravings without acting on them. It helps identify triggers and patterns. It documents progress that might otherwise be invisible. And crucially, it provides a way to process the shame and grief that often accompany addiction without the substance that was used to numb those feelings. The role of gratitude journaling deserves special mention. While it might seem like superficial positive thinking, research shows that regularly writing about what you're grateful for creates measurable changes in brain function and mood. But effective gratitude journaling isn't just listing good things. It's exploring why you're grateful, how these good things came to be, what they mean to you. It's the depth of processing, not just the positive focus, that creates the benefit, the shadow work possible through journaling. Exploring the parts of yourself you typically hide or deny can be transformative. The journal is perhaps the only place where you can safely acknowledge your pettiness, your jealousy, your vengeful fantasies, your inappropriate desires. In acknowledging these shadow aspects, you rob them of their power to unconsciously influence your behavior. You can choose whether to act on them rather than being driven by them. For people dealing with chronic illness, journaling serves as a witness to an experience that's often invisible to others. The daily reality of living with pain, fatigue, or progressive disease can be isolating. The journal becomes a place where the full truth of the experience can be told, not just the brave face shown to the world, but the fear, the rage, the grief for the life that was or might have been. The existential dimensions of journaling, grappling with meaning, mortality, freedom, isolation, make it a natural tool for spiritual exploration. Many people use their journals to dialogue with their conception of the divine, to explore their beliefs and doubts, to document spiritual experiences that might seem too personal or strange to share with others. The journal becomes a sacred space where the rational and mystical can coexist. As we consider the future of journaling in our digital age, new questions arise. What happens when artificial intelligence can analyze our journals and identify patterns we might miss? When apps can prompt us with personalized questions based on our writing patterns, when virtual reality can allow us to step inside our written memories and re experience them, these technologies might enhance the therapeutic power of journaling, or they might fundamentally alter something essential about the private relationship between writer and page. But regardless of technological changes, the fundamental human need that journaling addresses remains constant. We need to make sense of our experience. We need to feel heard, even if only by ourselves. We need to externalize the internal, to see our thoughts and feelings in a form we can examine and understand. We need to create narrative from chaos, meaning from suffering, coherence from fragmentation. The blank page that greets us when we open a journal is both terrifying and liberating. It demands nothing and accepts everything. It doesn't judge, doesn't interrupt, doesn't need us to be coherent or consistent. It simply receives, holds, preserves. In a world where we're constantly performing, editing, curating ourselves for others' consumption, the private journal offers something increasingly rare, a space to be completely, messily, contradictorily human. The practice of journaling is ultimately about relationship with yourself, with your experience, with the larger story of your life. It's about becoming both author and reader of your own existence, recognizing that while you can't always control what happens to you, you have some agency in how you narrate it. And in that narration, that meaning making, that transformation of experience into language, something alchemical happens. The lead of suffering becomes, if not gold, at least something workable, something that can be shaped and reshaped until it fits into the larger design of a life.